Law Matters, of course it does. Welcome once again. I'm Debbie Moraes, your host and moderator. As we tell you, this long-running program continues to provide legal information and practical assistance, and hopefully helps you with law matters. As we tell you, a better understanding of the law puts you in a better position to decide how to help yourself, your family, and sometimes your business. As we present various topics, you may decide to handle some issues yourself. And as we say, if you do decide to enlist outside counsel, our goal is to help you be better prepared and to prepare counsel as well. Our goal is to save you time, money, and hopefully to achieve the best possible results. As always, we want to welcome and thank once again Attorney David Bizar from the Bizar & Associates law firm in East Providence, who continues to weigh in on the topics that we discuss. And together today, we would both like to welcome our special guest, Andrew Horwitz. He is Roger Williams University's Associate Dean for Experiential Learning, providing students opportunities for real-world experience as he oversees clinical programs, clinical externships, pro bono programs, and other activities. In one specific example, students represent indigent criminal defendants in the Rhode Island District Court and the Rhode Island Traffic Tribunal under his direction, which is a perfect lead-in to today's subject, our topic today. With this special guest, we actually have two topics. One is the Driver's License Restoration Program. It's a solution to a problem that's referred to as arresting folks for being poor, as the headlines say. Specifically, how Providence is helping drivers get their licenses back. How exactly does that happen, and what do you need to know? Maybe it'll be a program that'll become a model. And secondly, the path to becoming a lawyer. There's more than one path, and we've discussed this previously. Today we have two attorneys who can weigh in on that. So please help us explain to us the program, a little bit about the background of that headline of arresting poor folks.
Yeah, so let's, the background is the right place to start. There is a very serious problem, not only here in Rhode Island and in Providence, which is the community that's chosen to actually try and address it, but really across the country, where driver's licenses become a vehicle through which a lot of entities try to collect money. They engage in debt collection through the use of the driver's license and through the process of suspending the driver's license. And so what that's caused, certainly locally, is that there are a lot of people who do not have a driver's license that's valid, not because of any issue connected to the safety of their driving, but really connected only to their poverty, to the fact that they are not able to pay off court debt, fines, other issues. We use child support. We suspend driver's licenses to try to collect child support. That has always struck me as particularly counterproductive. We're making it much harder for somebody to work at the same time that we're asking for them to provide money. So a study was conducted in Providence, and it revealed a number of things. It revealed that the number one cause for criminal arrests in Providence was for driving with a suspended driver's license. Number one. So the amount of police time and energy and resources devoted to dealing with pulling people over, processing them, charging them with crimes for driving with a suspended license is enormous. The other thing that that study revealed is that when you look at why people's driver's licenses are suspended, a very small percentage, under 10%, are actually suspended for reasons having to do with their driving. The rest of it is suspended for financial reasons, where if somebody simply had the resources, they would be able to have a valid driver's license.
That sounds like it's such a terrible situation, and obviously not one that exists just and only in Providence, but you decided to have it work in Providence or try it in Providence first?
Well, it's not that we decided that, it's that the city of Providence, in a very proactive fashion, decided, as they were exploring ways to use the federal money, the ARPA money that's the result of the pandemic, they put out a request for applications for people to seek a grant from the city of Providence to assist Providence residents in getting their driver's licenses reinstated. So a coalition of organizations, many of which I work with, an organization called Open Doors Rhode Island. I'm the chair of the board there, and that organization is devoted to assisting people with criminal histories sort of move on productively in their lives. Open Doors, Amos House, which is an organization that largely works with the community experiencing homelessness, and a legal program called the Rhode Island Center for Justice, which is a pro bono civil legal services organization. Collectively put in an application and got over $600,000 of grant money from the city of Providence to hire 2 full-time caseworkers and to hire the equivalent of 1 full-time attorney to go to work on these cases.
So David, you are in private practice and you represent a variety of different kinds of clients who have different issues. How does that dovetail with what you do? I mean, I can't imagine that many who are indigent are coming to you and saying, David, I have an issue, but now Andy is saying that there is a pro bono group that's signed on. How do those things play out?
I would say 2 things. First of all, the number of clients who do come to us before this program was in place because they were driving on a suspended license and had charges which become criminal after a certain number of charges and have created a lot of problems for them, need our help, and of course we're not usually getting those referred through the pro bono Bar Association program, so we have to charge them. And what we charge them is money that could be used towards paying their fines. And oftentimes, as you said, it's usually financial, and a lot of times it's because there are fines that didn't get paid. So the hat that I wear as a municipal court judge is actually much more relevant to this because all of the municipal court judges have been educated by Andy, and the traffic tribunal has been educated by Andy, and we know the problem, and we're all willing to work with anybody who comes in that has a suspended license primarily because of fines in my court or other courts. And we're willing to work that out. The one piece of advice I can give to anybody who gets a ticket is to show up. Because that's the number 1 problem is when people don't show up, it's suspension because of non-payment, and the cycle begins.
But is it true that maybe they don't want to show up because they know they don't have the money to pay the fines plus the penalties that are compounding that issue, never mind the issue that it caused in the first place?
I will respond to that again because Andrew has educated all of us on this. And the rules that judges are supposed to follow are if somebody is either found guilty or pleads guilty to having violated the motor vehicle statute and the fine is being imposed, they have a right to a hearing for an ability to pay. And any fair judge, and almost all the judges I know are fair, will give someone as much time as they need to be able to pay that without having to run into the issue of having a license suspended. So show up.
What kind of time frame is there between we stopped you because you had a suspended license and you didn't pay something else? What kind of, is it a matter of months where that lapse, what kind of, is there a grace period before it actually kicks in when your license is officially suspended because you didn't pay and you were poor?
So generally speaking, what happens is when there is an adjudication of a ticket and it imposes a fine and the person doesn't pay it, if the court has not established an ability to pay date, and that won't happen, as David just said, if the motorist doesn't show up. There generally is a 45-day period. The court will order a suspension of the license based on non-payment. And there is, as you suggest, a grace period, generally about 45 days before that order goes into effect.
It sounds like such a good program. Who's eligible for it? I mean, it is supposed to be those who can't pay, they are poor. What are those qualifications and how does someone apply for such?
Well, the apply question is easier, so I'll start there.
Okay, let's do it.
The 2 primary service organizations that are part of this program are Open Doors Rhode Island and the Amos House. And if you go on either of their websites or if you show up physically at their offices, there is an application form that you can fill out. You're right to suggest that this is for indigent clients, so there is a financial form that gets filled out and a determination of eligibility based on finances. Because this particular program is being financed by the City of Providence, there's also a requirement that you must be a Providence resident. Although there's some wiggle room in that, predominantly for people who are experiencing homelessness, who are couch surfing or whatnot, that if you have no permanent address, we can use the Amos House address, and that becomes your residence. So that qualifies you as a Providence resident.
When did this program actually start?
We announced, let me get this right, I want to say September, but it's been running for a few months, so I'm pretty sure September is correct.
I can't imagine, thanks to COVID and the number of people who are out of work, and that continues, that must have just increased the number of people who sadly qualify for that program.
The grant application, or I think this was a criterion of the grant request, was that you had to agree to service 600 clients over the 2-year period of the grant. And we got more than that number of applications within the first month that we opened the program. The need out there is enormous.
And what happens if you happen to have the misfortune of living in another city? You're still back in that situation.
So there is some funding that this program has managed to obtain that does allow for some servicing of clients outside the Providence region. The main difference is that part of what the grant money included was the ability for the program to actually pay down some of the debt up to an amount of $500 per applicant, per client. The folks who are living outside of Providence do not qualify for that assistance.
So was there also some stipend that went along with it to help them further, even beyond that
Stipend that goes to the client? No.
No. Or to pay some outstanding bill?
No. So
Okay.
what generally is happening, on the lower level, the request that the lawyer goes to the court with is to consider discharging the debt entirely. And that is permissible under the court rules. The court rules give municipal court judges and the traffic tribunal judges wide latitude to do what they think is right in the interests of justice. And so generally the argument that we're making is this person has been suspended for this non-payment for this period of time, and that alone should be the punishment that's sufficient for the behavior that the ticket described. On the larger scale basis, a lot of what's happening is, particularly over at the Rhode Island Traffic Tribunal, they're establishing payment plans. And that works too in terms of getting the client to the place where the client has a valid driver's license. They take some relatively nominal amount as a down payment, and based on the person's income, they determine what a reasonable monthly payment is. And they lift the suspension immediately, contingent upon the person remaining compliant with the payment plan.
Sounds right. So David, you're a municipal court judge, not in Providence.
Yep.
So what happens, how someone might come to you, and how might that play out in your situation?
So two different ways, of course. One is, through this program, people who have tickets don't necessarily have them all in Providence or the traffic tribunal. They can be from different municipal courts. And so you could have one in East Greenwich and one in Cumberland and one somewhere else. So as part of the process of cleaning up the situation that's holding you back from getting your license is you have to go to each municipal court, if that's where they are, and get those fines cleared off and the suspension removed. So there were two things I wanted to just mention on that. First of all, one of the changes I understand in the law for suspended licenses, they're moving some of that jurisdiction to the traffic tribunal instead of the district courts. Number one, that'll clear off some of the backlog in district court with all of those cases.
Yep.
And the traffic tribunal is better situated because it's such a complex web with your license, because you have the Department of Motor Vehicles where they have the hearing officers that have to clear your suspension and all of those things. So the traffic tribunal is better situated to be able to deal with that.
Yep.
And the second thing I was just going to say is that if you haven't gone through this process but know you have a suspended license, even though it's difficult, I think maybe you start at the registry.
You do.
Find out what is holding you up from having a license. And then, like I said, judges have been trained and understand the process. Start going on your own to try to get it done. Because we're going to be sympathetic to your situation. And as Andrew said, most of these people aren't suspended because of their driving habits. It's money. That's something we can deal with to help.
So a while ago, you were head of the Rhode Island Bar Association, and I know we've spoken before about the fact that you have a cadre of lawyers who are willing to do some pro bono work. Before this program was launched, would that have been something that your pro bono lawyers might have helped somebody wend their way through? Because, as you just described, that's quite a maze for the average person to understand.
The Rhode Island Bar Association does have the pro bono program. And if you have this situation, I would call and see if you can get a referral based on that, because, you're trying to help as many people as you can. It's overwhelming, and it's got the Providence little directive there. So if you have a license problem, I would call, because I think we're in a situation where if it's financial, we all want to help somebody work that out.
Being in the communications business, I have to ask, so how do people find out about the program that exists in Providence? And then I guess I'd be asking you later, David, do you end up trying to suggest that if someone is likely to come to you who happens to live in Providence? How do you get the message out in the first place, and how do you handle it in the second?
So getting the message out in the first place, we did hold a press conference. It got pretty good coverage. It was certainly covered on the front page of the Providence Journal and carried on, I think, all three of the major local networks. There was no issue with word getting out in terms of the volume of applications that came in and the speed at which that happened.
Okay.
On an ongoing basis is a little more complicated. I think you would have to have somebody, and it could be a municipal court judge, somebody point you in the direction of Open Doors Rhode Island or Weymouth House.
Sounds right.
And of course, we can always put something on Law Matters. Then that there's no better communication.
There you go.
Exactly, and on social media as well. So this program, as exciting as it is, it sounds like such a logical, reasonable thing to have taken place. What are the barriers that keep others from just stepping up and say, why not? I mean, from an economic standpoint, from a practical standpoint, from a human interest standpoint, what are the barriers?
I think the primary barrier is the financial standpoint. I think there are concerns from some communities, some judges, about the resources that the city or town or state are expecting into their coffers through the enforcement of these various traffic tickets, parking tickets, moving violations. And there's some concern, I think, that if word gets out that at some point all of this will just be discharged, that the incentive to actually pay it gets reduced. I think those are the concerns. I can tell you, having devoted my entire career to representing indigent clients, that my experience is most people who get a ticket and can pay it. The people who don't pay it and who allow their licenses to be suspended because they haven't paid it are, generally speaking, people who really are not in a position to pay. And so my own opinion on that financial question is the vast majority of this is uncollectible debt. It just is. And we're really harming poor people.
Snowballing. It must snowball.
I often use the metaphor of the black hole, right? Once you get suspended, for most people who are indigent, they need to keep driving, because if they're lucky enough to be employed, they can't get there by public transportation in a way that's effective. And so they keep driving. They get stopped. We've now changed the laws on driving with a suspended license, so it's only the fourth and subsequent offense that become criminal. But before it becomes criminal, it's just more money, more potential license suspension. And you're absolutely right. It just escalates and escalates. And You know, David was talking about people showing up in court, and I agree with that 100%. It's something that I say to every client, is you magnify your problems many times over when you don't show up in court. But for many of my clients, there's a real sense of hopelessness. They've sort of given up. You know, they've had 4 or 5 tickets. They haven't been able to keep up with the payments. Now they get a new ticket, and their feeling is like, I can't. There's nothing productive that I can do. And it sure would be nice if we could get to a place where we reverse that concept and people would feel like, yes, I want to show up for my ticket because I have faith that I will be treated appropriately, somebody will care that I don't have financial resources, and there'll be a reasonable outcome.
And on the money side for the community, if you've got somebody who's unable to pay and just can't afford it, and now you're spending money trying, when you have to arrest them again, and processing and going through all of that and clogging up the dockets, it's counterproductive financially. And if somebody can afford to pay something, and it's a little bit, let them do that. Just put someone in a position where they can succeed.
Sounds right. Speaking in part about cost of things, but also just access to information. Part 2 here, in the short amount of time that we have left, many people still want to become lawyers, even though there seems to be a glut of them. I don't know how that goes. There are many jokes that say we don't need any more, we won't go there, but there are many different paths to get to an endpoint, whether it's becoming a lawyer or someplace else. So how has that changed over the years? David and I have spoken of this before, undergraduate discussions and whatnot. How do you see that this has changed in the recent years, since you are a professor as well as a practitioner?
How has the process of getting to law school changed?
And getting to become a lawyer, practicing lawyer.
I'm not sure it's changed an awful lot.
Okay.
You know, depending on how far back you rewind the clock. I mean, one thing that happened that stopped happening now, but that happened over a period of time, is that law school tuition went way, way up as a matter of percentage, way beyond what was happening in the rest of our economy, so that the mere enterprise of going to law school became much more expensive. Law schools have started to figure that out, and many, including my own Roger Williams University, have actually reduced tuition to try to bring that more into line. There are better and more effective loan forgiveness programs that try to address that issue. But it remains a fact that the finances connected to going to law school are a real challenge. The process itself, having served many years on our admissions committee, we're not much concerned about what somebody majors in. The concept of a pre-law major isn't really meaningful as far as law school admissions is concerned. We just want to see that somebody had an academically successful college career where they showed that they could apply themselves academically and could succeed in that environment.
I know we've spoken of that, David, and you had an undergraduate plan, and then it wasn't necessarily that it had to be pre-law.
Right. No, and that's what Andrew's saying is, do whatever inspires you, whatever your passion is, but do it as well as you can and show that you have the ability to do that, and I think that's all that you need for law school. I think what's actually somewhat more interesting is, for me, I had a lot of friends who went to law school who never practiced law. It's the education. And the educational component about how to think logically, how to take one precedent and compare it to a set of facts, can be used in business, it can be used anywhere. But I think what's changed from when I was in law school is some of the more practical, hands-on things. We had a tax clinic. I think maybe one other clinic when I was in law school, but the experience of law school has changed a bit.
Yeah, in law school, there's no question about that. I mean, that's what I do at Roger Williams University. I'm the Associate Dean for Experiential Education, and law schools have gotten much smarter. Medical schools, for a long time, recognized, okay, classroom can get you up to a certain point, but if you're actually going to engage in the practice, somebody needs to actually show you how that's done, and you need to try it and begin it in a highly supervised environment. And that's what law schools are doing a much, much better job of now. That, you know, in my program, Students represent people charged with misdemeanor criminal offenses under my direct supervision, and they're learning in a very hands-on way, but in a highly supervised environment to make sure that the clients are protected.
It sounds like that would be a very enriching experience too, just having that kind of OJT, so to speak,
Yes.
at that stage. So thinking about money and also thinking about behavioral changes, do you find that there are many students who want to do things online? And unlike becoming a surgeon, you can't necessarily do all of that online. OJT is very specific and it needs to be in a different kind of environment and it can't entirely be done online. So do you find that, number one, do you find that a lot of students are still working in a profession that pays the day, you know, the rent, and then they work at night? How does that work? What do you see now?
So the return to being real people in real life present, that is a challenging issue in the law, as I think it is in most professions. We did have students who, because of the pandemic, got a significant chunk of their law school education online. I personally am not particularly comfortable with doing a lot of work in that environment. I don't think for most students it's nearly as effective. And then when you get to the question of the experiential learning component, that's really not possible to do in an online environment. And so we are struggling. I think every law school is struggling to figure out where that whole piece is going to settle out now that we are hopefully mostly through this pandemic, and trying to figure out what level we return to and what parts of online education, because there are some, work well and are well worth keeping.
It's a little bit like the practice of law in the trial experience. There are certain things you can do, Zoom or WebEx or whatever, motions, things of that nature, that'll work.
Yes.
But you can't do a trial virtually. You have to be in person.
Right.
So it's trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. The same thing for the educational experience.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
I think it seems that a Zoom could serve some functions at sometimes, or WebEx, as you're saying, but nothing like having someone that's directly supervising and getting you in the field so that you know what you're going to be encountering in the real world, whether it's trial or, we've talked about before, public relations jobs and lobbying efforts, teaching, and several other professions that someone might have with a law degree.
Absolutely.
We thank you for joining us. We thank you for tuning into The Law Matters. We hope that we've addressed some interesting issues that may be coming your way in terms of driver's license restoration and how that might spread. We think it certainly sounds like it's something we should stay tuned to. Thank you for staying tuned as we tell you the law matters to you.